Welcome to the Mind Like Water podcast. This is episode 2, Becoming Stress-Free. All right. So, Origins podcast out of the way. We are now into the muck and the mire, into this concept of becoming stress-free. What is that? What are we talking about? What's going on? Is this something that's real, or is it fait accompli that we are going to be stressed, that we are modern human beings, and boy, life is hard, deal with it. I'm going to say this about that concept. That concept is completely understandable. We have to understand where we are at in this place and time in 2018 in order for us to even begin to think about becoming stress-free, or when you're listening to this podcast, if not in 2018. Your grandparents, or your great-grandparents, depending on how you view the world, lived in a modern time that was still much slower than the time we live in. Let's take the point of a letter. Your grandparents, or again, great-grandparents, a couple generations ago, they would, if they wanted to communicate with somebody, they would get some correspondence together. They would get a letter. They would sit down maybe at a typewriter, or maybe they would do it, oftentimes they would just do it by pen and paper, which is why penmanship was such a very important thing, because if you had bad penmanship or you couldn't spell, you were probably thought less of. And you would record onto this paper, with your pen and paper, you would write a letter, which we can still do today. You would then go to the post office, get a stamp, or you'd have a stamp on, and you would communicate this letter. You would drop it into the mailbox. The postman would take it. The person that you were sending it to would get the letter. All of this would take place, and if they responded, all this would take place in a matter of 7 to 10 days. For perhaps a single piece of business to be taken care of. Maybe with loved one, maybe it was a thank you for going to a dinner party. Who knows? You name it, this is how human beings communicate. And of course, they would pick up the phone and call and have a phone call and discuss with each other what was going on. My generation, when it came along, we had emails and we were starting to get text messages. And so to put that in correspondence, that same letter that you would write, you could text message somebody. Okay? Very quick. You could shoot them an email, which of course both things we can still do today. Now the demands on today are a little bit different. The demands on today are every bit as part of the way we communicate is not just with those tools, but now we are communicating on Facebook or Twitter or whatever social media application is your what you like to do, Slack or whatever these tools are, and whatever the tools are when you're listening to this podcast. You can communicate in an instant everything you want to get out there in the world. So what this has done, this change in society has done to us, and we are victims of this, is that it has caused a speed up, which means that we don't plan, because why the heck plan to do something if you can take care of it, or if you can engage in it right when you feel like it? Now this, to a unionist, or to an organizer, or to an activist, is akin to chocolate candy, or akin to sweets. This ability to jump out and just engage with everything in the world is been pretty toxic. And what I mean by that isn't that communication itself is bad. What I mean by that is being a modern human being and living in this era, and the amount of correspondence that goes on every single day for a unionist or an activist who is moved oftentimes by by injustice, or fighting injustice rather, or seeing injustice done to their loved ones, want to jump in immediately and take care of the issue at hand and speak truth to power, which is great. That's wonderful. Oftentimes in the modern environment, or if you're a staff person for a union or any number of things, you are taking on multiple different situations. So you jump into that one thing and maybe you get resolved and you feel good, but you have no time to celebrate. You have no time to write that book about that heroic journey that just took place. You're on to the next thing and the next and the next. So you see what I'm saying here. Modern life, with how we are inundated, is faster than previous generations, more complex, it's coming at us. So we have to be able to organize ourselves. So as I was working on this committee for purpose and morale, improvement of morale, I realized very quickly that I looked around and I saw the majority of people that I work with, whether management, whether it was fellow organizing staff, whether it was activists, everyone, no one said, I have unlimited amounts of time and capacity and I can jump in on any project you want. Quite the opposite, really. What I saw is that people did not have the time. They did not have the ability to jump right on in. They're stressed. Multiple team meetings have gone by, or different situations have gone by in my life, where somebody will have a good concept or idea that they want to work on. And what's the first word out of people's mouths? Oh, I don't have the time. So then the question came, if we're going to improve morale or purpose and all the things I'm working in, how do I find time? How do I find time? If only we could add more time to the clock. If only we could have 28 hours in a day or 26 hours. And then in giving thought about this more, I realized that having that time, that extra time, means that you're just going to have extra time to be stressed out. And that isn't actually a solution. That maybe this isn't about time or capacity, which is a great, wonderful word that just says so many things and says nothing at all. Maybe, just maybe, it's that we don't have a way of prioritizing what comes into our world. Now, I want to say this up front. There are many methodologies. You have a methodology for getting stuff done. We all have methodologies. You couldn't be, on some level, an activist or an organizer or part of this movement in any sort of way if you didn't have some sort of methodology to get stuff done. I mean, that's got to be understood. Some folks do calendars. Some folks do reminder lists. Some folks do any number of things. But so I don't want to just say, there's one way to rule them all and oh my God, the scales are going to fall from people's eyes. That's not what this podcast is about. This podcast is to understand how to be stress-free. So the elites, and I'm going to call them the elites, the 1%, the richest of the rich, usually they have two things. One, they likely have an assistant that they can put on the payroll to work with them on this stuff and help them prioritize, help them manage the affair. They call that person either a consultant or a manager. And say, oh my God, we've brought in this consultant or this manager, and they usually become lifelong friends because suddenly it's like they know the dirty secrets and they're helping them prioritize. Unfortunately, us as working people don't get that. So as I was setting out to try to understand this piece for the work on that committee, I understood very quickly that I had to do kind of, I had to steal fire from the heavens, so to speak. I had to figure out what is it that the ruling elites do when they're trying to do it, and considering the fact that I can't hire somebody to be my own personal assistant to figure this out, what is it that people are doing to have successful and being stress-free? And I realized something very clear. There's many, many people that we think are elites that can't figure this out, but they have the money to throw at the problem. So I found what happened in this investigation, though, is, of course, I started reading. I started going to Powell's books. I started trying to figure out what that was. And I had seen this book and I've been using different productivity apps like most people, or different productivity systems, trying to find this out. And I kept seeing this philosophy known as getting things done. And this book was done by a gentleman named David Allen. Now, David Allen does not look like or present himself as a revolutionary. He is not a person. If you want to have a picture of the man, you would have it as this person. He's white. He's a male. He's part of the baby boomer generation in his 70s. Clearly has a very confident life. Looks and acts as somebody who is the very definition of privilege. And so that created a wall for me. I didn't want no, I'm Toby. I'm going to figure this out on my own. I don't need this type of crap. So it created a wall because I'm a white male and I have some level of privilege. I want to run away from that. I got enough problems in my life. I don't need to compound it by being part of that type of thinking. And I remembered what Saul Alinsky often talked about, which was organizing does not belong to any culture in particular. Organizing does not belong to any group. It doesn't belong to the rich. It does not belong to the poor. It does not belong to the bourgeoisie. It does not belong to the petty bourgeoisie. It does not belong to the proletariat. It does not belong to any particular race. It does not belong to any particular gender identification. Organizing is organizing. That's why I love organizing. That's what makes it passionate. That gives me the language to talk with other folks. So if an idea or a logic is well thought out, it can apply and it can give confidence. And it gives me the confidence to do this podcast, realizing that I might have people from different backgrounds listening to it and having to be aware that my audience for this podcast could be shifting or could have different values at different points based on what they're going through in their life. So understand that, I said, look, I'm desperate. I got to figure this out. I got to figure this out for myself. Projects are coming at me. Personal projects, volunteer projects, home, professional projects. All this stuff is coming at me, and I felt underwhelmed, just like everyone else does. I have yet again, in my own life experience, to see somebody who's going, wow, this is great. Boy, life is just really, really wonderful. So this person, David Allen, wrote a book called Getting Things Done. Now, if you could have a title of a book that was any less inspiring than Getting Things Done, I couldn't find it. I mean, Getting Things Done. How, it's not Viva la Resistance now or whatever, Revolution now. It's not a podcast, or it's not a philosophy that says we're Moneyball, for instance. What a great title, Moneyball. We're going to employ Moneyball. We're going to get our payroll down. We're going to find people that can we're going to find people that have no relatives so that they can work around the clock 24 hours a day, and we're going to be really smart. There's philosophies and better names, but he wrote this book called Getting Things Done and published in 2001 after almost 20 years of being this type of consultant that I talked about, that basically went into rich people's worlds so they would cut him a check and he would use it to fund his life. This book caught on with a lot of folks, with a lot of the professionalists, with a lot of the professional people who had this very basic dynamic, which we all have now, which is I have so many things coming at me. I've got to go to my daughter's party, and oh boy, my wife wants to go get her hair done, and I gotta get transferred there. And oh yeah, there's a basketball game that I want to go to. Oh, and I gotta go to the doctor's checkup. And boy, my car has got to get into the shop. And oh, wait a minute, I also on work I got that report that's due on Monday, and I gotta go visit this scientist. You get the idea. So many things are coming at us so very quickly that it is hard to tell where we are at